So part 2, provisioning an Azure Windows VM. Okay, so again, this is really just to simulate what that will look like. Usually when you're deploying your first set of VMs, you're likely going to be extending your server infrastructure into Azure hybrid setup. So typically your first set of VMs are going to be, domain controllers, DNS servers, and so forth. Availability set, we're going to cover that as well. This is what Azure provides to give you that 99.9% SLA, right? So the way it works is when you deploy 2 or more VMs, you can actually set an availability set. So that way, let's say both of your domain controllers, you don't want both of those VMs existing in the same rack at a data center, right? Because if something happened with that rack, power failure or whatnot, you're losing both of your domain controllers, right? So an availability set guarantees that both of those domain controllers will be in different racks, okay? Not only that, but occasionally when Microsoft does their maintenance, which they have to do, they're only going to take down or upgrade or do maintenance on one rack at a time. So that ensures that you'll always have that redundancy in place. Next here is touching on the actual sizing, but again, very high level. I'm mainly just going to show what that looks like. Next is selecting which subnet your VMs will actually live on. And then quickly touching on public IPs, because in Azure, when you deploy a VM, Azure will automatically assign it a public IP because you're going to need to access it. But in our case, we're using an NG firewall. We do not need to assign a public IP directly to the VM, and I'll show you how to remove that. So jumping in here, I'm going to go ahead and jump right back into my Azure environment. And then from here, I'm going to want to go ahead and deploy a VM, right? So I'll go to virtual machines. And then on the upper left there, I'll click add. You're going to have a couple of options here. First things first, I'm just going to go ahead and select the VM or the image I want to spin up. So in this case, Windows Server. I'm going to select the same resource group. If you want to, you can create a new one if you want to organize it. I'm going to set the server or VM name, Survey VM01. As far as region, I'm going to keep it in Central US. And then this is where the availability option comes into play, right? So there's 2 options available. There's availability zones and set. Set is local to that data center, okay? That's what we're going to touch on in this video. So I'm going to set my availability set. I don't have one yet, so I'm going to create a new one. So here I can give it whatever name I want. And then you can see there, you can select your fault domains, right? So you can select up to 3. So if you have 3 VMs, they're going to be on 3 different fault domains. If you have 2 VMs, they're going to, be divided into 2. I have my upgrade domains as well. And again, that has to do with, Microsoft's maintenance, right? So I'll go and hit OK. I have my availability set, and I'm going to select my sizing. So here you're going to be selecting it based on your how many virtual CPUs, how much memory. The cost on the right-hand side, that's all just an estimate, right? For me, I'm going to pick 2 virtual CPUs and 4 gigs of memory, right, for my VM. I'm going to select that, and then go ahead and enter in my admin credentials. So these are the local admin credentials that Azure will spin the VM up with, okay? So you can get access into it. So I have that all in place. And then next here, I'm going to provision what type of disks, okay? So you have a couple options. I'm not going to really dig too deep into that, but for me, I'm going to select premium SSD. For the networking, I have my demo VNet. For the subnet, I'm going to select subnet A, okay? And then there's my public IP. I'm going to go ahead and remove that because, again, I'm not going to use it. And then no network security groups. And then on the management plane, I'm going to just keep that all default. This is just for diagnostics and so forth that Azure can do for you in case there's an issue with a VM. And everything looks good, so I'm just going to go ahead and deploy this first VM. So we'll give it a couple of seconds here, and you can see there in the upper right, it's deploying again into that resource group. And in this case here, it's actually going to create all of my objects. It's going to create my virtual NIC. It's going to create my virtual disks, and then send it all into that resource group. And later, once I'm done deploying, I'll show you the resource group, and you'll see all the objects that were created. So here, I'm going to go ahead and show you the VM that I just deployed. And you can see the private IP that's been assigned to it. So it starts with .4 as the first dynamic assigned IP. And now I'm going to deploy a second VM. And mainly what I want to showcase here is, how do I add another VM to that same availability set, right? So let's say I'm deploying my second domain controller now to be a part of that set. So I'll call it server A, let's say VM02. I want to keep that in central US. And then here I can actually select my availability set. So now I have that option. So my demo_set is now available. Now, when I spin up this VM, it's going to exist in the same availability set and be ensured that it's going to be in different fault and upgrade domains. I'm not going to do that here. There's really no need for me in this demo. So I'm just going to provision server B, and I'm going to throw this guy onto my second subnet, my server subnet B, okay? Just going to use the same sizing, same local admin credentials as well. And get that entered there. Head over to disks, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to select premium networking. For my subnet, I'm going to select subnet B. I'm going to turn off the public IP and the network security group. Again, we're not using any of that. And then management, I'll just keep that default again. So now once this gets deployed, this VM will live on subnet B, and it's going to have, again, a dynamically assigned IP within that subnet as well, okay? And then now I kind of have that segmentation in place, right? And just like the previous VM, it's going to create all the network objects, NICs, virtual disks, and so on. And now you can see here I have both of my VMs. And if I drill into server B, you can see there the 10.120.4 address. And from here, if I drill into the actual resource group, you can now see all these additional objects that have been created, okay? So that's why, I mean, in your case, if you're doing your own deployment, you can put them into different resource groups. Here I can drill into the actual virtual NIC. I can see the IP address that was assigned. If I want to, I can actually go ahead and drill in further and actually statically assign. So, this is where you statically assign your IP addresses for your server. So you don't actually do that from within the VM, okay? I'm gonna back out here, go back into my resource group. And that concludes provisioning your VMs. So now I have my network infrastructure. I have my Azure VNet. I have my VMs in there. So I mean, I'm almost there, right? I have most of my infrastructure in place. So to recap here, again, I deployed 2 VMs, and again, they're typically domain controllers and DNS servers from the get-go for your first set of servers. I showed you how to deploy them in an availability set. I also showed you the sizing options that are available, selecting the actual VM's subnet once you deploy it, and then touch on the public IPs on the actual VMs and how to remove it.